I'm about as rational and skeptical of the supernatural as they come. Nevertheless, I've experienced countless weird events that I tend to just dismiss since I have no way of reproducing them consistently, and when they do occur, even if they're witnessed, because they can't be reproduced, they create more of a holy shit that was weird type of story for the day than a sudden belief in the supernatural. That's what these are, my holy shit that was weird stories. The first is that I've heard people's thoughts on two occasions that stand out clearly. The first time and the most recent time come to mind. When I say I heard them, it was like I hallucinated them speaking. I wasn't looking at them and yet responded to their thoughts at the time as if they said them out loud. I actually heard them speak with my ears, or it seemed like I did. Obviously, everyone involved was surprised and confused. I've tried to think about any similarities among the times that this happened and haven't been able to really find a true X factor. I get the usual intuition where I know the answers to questions before I ask them and things like that, but these times were different because there was an actual sensory hallucination. The next is, I've had enough dreams come true that it caused me to seriously consider why they were coming true. Obviously, I have seemingly meaningless dreams mixed in, but there's a certain type of dream that when I have it, it feels more like I'm visiting a potential future on the timeline before waking up in the present. It's not that they're especially vivid dreams, in fact, they're mundane, but there's details that are present that I notice and remember when I wake up. Then, when that actual scenario occurs, I'm like, I've been here and seen this before, like remembering the future. My best guesses of how these types of dreams happen is that in some cases, the dreams themselves were guiding me to make them a reality on a subconscious level, and in others, my brain was maybe just taking variables that I encounter in my daily life and simulating likely scenarios I might experience. In the latter case, if my brain simulates, let's say, 20 scenarios in my dreams with minor details shifted around, it's likely that I'll inevitably come across a scenario that seems familiar. In one of my dreams, though, I was stabbed with a big boar looking spear on the left of my body in the middle of my rib cage. Pain actually woke me up. To this day, 8 years later, I have a phantom pain there. A recent one, and definitely memorable. The girl I'm dating now never had seizures before in her life. Coincidentally, she started having them a couple months after we started dating. Scary as hell in their own right. Just my luck. She got on medication, everything was good. Then one night, she had the mother of all seizures. I called 911 as usual, got her on her side, and waited for her to come to. Well, the seizing stopped, and so did everything else. This was different than the other times. To this day, I swear this girl died. Her tongue had that lifeless hang to it. Her eyes were staring vacantly into nothing. Her whole complexion was ghostly. Blue lips and the like are common when someone has a seizure. That wasn't this. I'm shouting her name, stunned, shaking her. This was about 20 to 30 seconds, maybe longer. At this point, I'm looking at her and I stand up, put my hands on my head, and I'm like, oh no, holy fuck, oh no. Then in my head, I had this moment of clarity. It was like time stopped, like I got sucked out of my body and went to this quiet, dark, cosmic place. I thought, this girl is 22 years old. She's been pretty sheltered her whole life. She's lived a good, simple life. She's finally starting to enjoy life and see the bigger world, and she goes out like this? Too cliche. Pointless. One last time I called her name, shoved her, and boom, she jolted back to life screaming. I mean, screaming. Everything came back to life, but she wasn't herself. She didn't seem aware of anything, and obviously I first thought, oh no, she has brain damage. Paramedics and her parents arrived, and we couldn't calm her down or communicate with her. What sticks out in my mind was one paramedic saying, "This isn't a seizure." They brought her to the hospital in critical condition. Followed behind, and by the time I got there, she was seemingly coming to. She later told me she didn't recall screaming at all. She remembers seeing everyone in the room and trying to call out to us, but we weren't responding. It didn't seem like we could hear her. There's more to it, but I'm basically just typing this stream of consciousness as I remember it. The next couple of days, I would wake up in the middle of the night, simply not be able to sleep, and I would go for drives trying to figure out what happened that night. It still sticks with me, but for at least a month after, I was really shaken up by the whole thing. To make matters more bizarre, myself and her friends noticed a distinct change in her personality and mannerisms, like she came back as a different person. Not in a bad way, but definitely different. She grew her hair out, dyed it, started cursing more, seemed to get sharper in her senses and less naive. Her sense of humor was different. She started dressing differently. I jokingly started referring to her as Beric Dondararian. She seems better now and hasn't had a seizure since, but that night definitely changed me as well, and I'll likely never forget it, for better or for worse. I saw a shadow person. When I was about 17, I was at my friend's apartment building, which his parents owned. He had an apartment to hang out in on the top floor and used to go to the roof to smoke. One night, we were about to go up, but I had to pee, so I told him I'd meet him up there. After I was done, I went to the stairs to the attic portion that was connected to the roof. There were no lights, so we always used our phones to guide us. It was an old building, and the attic was creepy and cluttered at the time. As I made my way to the roof door, I saw a shadow pass by me. I followed the direction it went, thinking it was my friend. I kept saying that I knew it was him and to stop playing around. It passed me a few more times when I heard my friend's voice from downstairs. He got a call from his girlfriend and was in another room talking to her the whole time. I have no idea what that shadow figure was, but it really freaked me out. I told my friend what happened and that I did not want to go back up there. A couple things for people to consider that have been mentioned when I've told this story before. It was not my own shadow, since the only light up there was coming from my phone, which I held in front of me. It also wasn't someone that just broke in, because that door locks from the outside, and the next day my friend went to check when it was daytime and there was no one there. Growing up in a really old house, we had lots of weird things happen. My family still talks about the spirits, or whatever they were, but they mostly seem to have calmed down as we renovated more and more of the house. Kind of like they felt it was less and less their place to be still, I think. Never menacing things, just odd, but terrifying sometimes. Benign things like the dryer turning on, which my mom actually called her helper spirit because our machine was kind of old. Sometimes it had to be run twice to get things dry. Two instances always stand out to me that I'll never forget though. One time I was playing in my room, nothing unusual at all. We had this cheap fake wood shelf that had books and toys and knickknacks all over it. I was playing somewhat in front of it when it exploded. I don't mean that like a bomb, but I don't know how else to explain it. Everything just started coming, flying off the shelves and flying everywhere. Oddly enough, not a single thing hit me. I remember being mad at my parents after they heard the noise and came to see what had happened. They didn't believe me and just told me to clean it up. Second story happened to my brothers as well. It's a weird shared experience that was ongoing. Oftentimes, we'd see shadow people in the house, sometimes together, but one seemed to visit me quite often when I had a bedroom in the room that seemed to be the most active or whatever. We all shared that room for some time and had different stories. There always appeared to be a shadow man standing in the doorway watching me. No features or anything, just a dark outline of a man. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes and opened them again, it would be closer. Some nights I would just sit there and stare. He never moved while I was watching. It's giving me the shivers now just thinking about it again. I'd stare for what might seem like hours until I must have finally passed out, looking for any imperfections to let me know if it was just a shadow or my mind playing tricks. And because I didn't want it to come any closer, I only ever closed and opened my eyes enough times to have it near the edge of the bed once. I remember being scared and screaming for my parents often, but I'm not sure I really felt threatened ever, just cold. That could be from the crappy windows in a 100-year-old house too. Anyway, I remember when we finally got around to renovating that room, we ripped up the carpet and underlay to find shitty black and white linoleum tile stuff. Near the door off to the side was this weird human-sized stain. It wasn't unusual finding water damage and stuff when we were doing renos, and I hadn't seen or even thought about the shadow man for a very long time when we ripped up that floor. Instantly I knew that was something, but it's weird because it didn't feel like I thought of it. It just seemed like I was told that as soon as I saw it. I've had weird experiences my whole life. Here's a couple that stick out. When I was a kid, there was a night when I wasn't feeling well, and I woke up to an old woman in a blue dress pulling my covers up and stroking my hair. For some reason, I didn't feel scared or anything. I asked my mom about it the next day. She found a picture of my great-grandmother, long deceased, in the blue dress that she was buried in. It was definitely her. I used to live in a foreign country that had experienced a lot of war and violence, especially against indigenous people, and I knew my apartment was haunted. Regularly at night, empty water bottles would be tossed around my bedroom. The lights would go on in the middle of the night, footsteps walking, doors shutting, etc. I went to the local market to get some sage or something, and the woman who sold charms wouldn't sell any to me, saying I was cursed to walk among them. Ended up moving a couple weeks later, and it stopped. I moved into an apartment about 5 years ago with my boyfriend, which also had unusual activity. One night, I was home alone, on the phone with my best friend. All of a sudden, the TV turned on max volume, scaring the crap out of me. I screamed, turned off the TV, and was explaining to my friend what had happened when across the apartment, both the bedroom and bathroom doors slammed shut. It was winter. There were no windows open. I immediately left the house and returned the next day. A ton of other stuff happened there. I can get into it if anyone is interested. But we did a little ghost hunting once we left, and the apartment was empty of furniture. We got responses, and I have them recorded. I live in the bottom of a fourplex, so my bedroom window is about aligned with the sidewalk outside. I have drapes on the window so I can barely see out of it, mainly just silhouettes and lights. I woke up in the middle of the night a few weeks ago. While trying to go back to sleep, I noticed a faint light passing the window every few minutes. A little more time passes and I glance at the window again and see the light just sitting still for a few seconds, then dims away. The next morning I didn't give it much thought, but when I went to take the trash out, I checked my window, and sitting on the sill was my cell phone. Guess I wasn't clear enough. My phone was on the outside of the windowsill. It wasn't the fact that my phone was out there that freaked me the most. It was seeing the light pace across several times. It just didn't make sense to me. My older brother was able to get a hold of me while I was living in Hawaii, which in itself was a supernatural occurrence. "Hey, calling about Tony." Upon hearing him say that, I thought to myself, I hope he is okay. In that moment, near the beach in Hawaii, I saw two shooting stars shoot in parallel. And then my brother said, "He has died." Funny thing is that I was very calm, even though I had heard the words. I knew he was alright. His best friend Eric woke up to milk his cows in Tillamook, Oregon, the morning of Tony's death. When he got the call from my older brother about Tony, Luke said, "Eric, calling about Tony." Eric said, "Yeah? He was just here helping me milk the cows." Luke said, "I don't know how. Tony died last night." The Sunday after he had passed, my mom and sisters were at church. Mom saw Tony at the front of church near the altar. Tony said to Mom, "Wow, this is cool. I can see you, but you can't see me. Well, I've got to go." Then disappeared. I believe there is an afterlife. When I was in high school, I used to get together with some friends to play music. The friend's house that we met at was at a cul-de-sac up on a hill, so there was a flight of steps leading up to the front door. After jamming for a while, I decided to head home at about 9 or 10 p.m. I had parked my car on the opposite side of the cul-de-sac from the house. There weren't any street lamps except for one or two a little bit down the road. When I made it to the bottom of the steps, I saw a really large, dark dog standing underneath one of these street lamps. I just assumed it was a neighbor's dog and continued to my car, but when I glanced back at it, it was sprinting towards me. I ran to my car, clumsily unlocked it, just like the movies, and as soon as I got in, flipped on the lights. By the time I got in, the dog should have been right next to my car, or at least nearby, but there was no trace. I even circled the cul-de-sac looking in the trees for this huge dog, but I never saw it. When I asked my friend later, he told me that none of his neighbors owned a dog, and besides, few of them were even home. He lived in a neighborhood that was primarily second homes. It scared my pants off, and I never went to his house again after dark. When I was in the 6th grade, we lived in a house that definitely seemed haunted. Nothing was ever terrifying, but it was strange. We used to store our pots and pans on the top of the fridge. We would often hear crashing as if all these pots had fallen down, only to walk in the kitchen to find them where they were supposed to be. Once, I was in the kitchen with my mom. She had her back turned to me at the stove while I was at the counter. Then right from the center of the kitchen, someone said, "Mom," quite loudly. She turned around to ask me, "What?" but saw that I was shocked. That spooked us. But the weirdest thing that happened there was the inexplicable disappearance of the crisper drawer from the fridge. We came home from vacation to find the drawer missing, but all the contents still in the fridge. We at first thought someone may have broken in and stolen some food, but there was beer and other relatively enticing items in there that were untouched. Later, when we moved out, my dad found the crisper drawer in an obscure part of the garage. When I was about 18 years old, I often walked home from my friend's house at night. The walk was about 5 kilometers or 3 miles through rural area in northern Germany. No lights, only one street in the area, no cars, everything silent except a few animals in the wood. Sometimes I was a bit afraid when walking home alone through the woods at night, hearing cracking nearby, especially when we saw zombie movies before. But one night, something strange happened. For the blink of an eye, everything was bright as day. No sound, just brightness. I was not blinded. I could see anything around me, but no source of light, and the light vanished as fast as it came. This happened around 3 times that night. I also ruled out lightning because it was a clear night, and also the weather report said nothing about it. I asked some of my friends and parents, but they were giving me odd looks and also had no idea. I knew that there were some old army outposts around, including a tank graveyard, but they were all closed many years ago. I still have no idea. Six years ago, my wife and I were laying down in the back room watching movies. We were the only ones in the building that night as everyone else was out of town on vacation. My bedroom is on the first floor adjacent to the gangway in the backyard. As we're watching movies, the motion sensor lights went off in the gangway. I thought nothing of it. Could have been wind blowing leaves through the gangway, as so often happens. The light turns off, but 5 minutes later, it turns on again, and this time I look out the back window to see if anyone's in the yard, and I didn't notice anything except for the fact that the night was actually really still. No trees blowing the water on the pool or reflective sheet, nothing special, nothing there. It happened one more time, and this worried me, so I got up, went through the back door, down the stairs, and checked the yard to see if anyone was there. There was nothing, so I made my way back to the door, and as I turned around to lock it, I suddenly felt every hair on my body stand up. It was the overwhelming sensation that I was being watched, so I turned to look up the stairs expecting to see something looking back at me, but there's nothing there. But I still feel a presence. Now this makes me anxious because I have to walk up those same stairs to get back into my room, which I do slowly, very slowly. And as I answer my wife, she asks me what's wrong. She can tell something happened, but there's nothing I can say because nothing did happen. I laid back down in bed with her, put the movie on, and after some time, the most startling thing happened, for which I still have no logical explanation. My bed is positioned adjacent to the gangway wall, and the first floor is some 10 feet above the ground. Out of nowhere, there was a loud audible and physical bang, like someone just took a sledgehammer to the outside wall. It hit so hard that the bed even shook. I turned to look at my wife. We were just completely confused, a little scared and not going back outside to see what it was. Since then, other things have happened. She claims to have seen a little boy in our apartment peeking from around the corner towards the back of our place. I saw the same thing, but I could not tell if it was a boy or a girl. Couldn't even tell if it looked human. The only thing I saw was something peeking from around the corner, and when I went to make eye contact, it dashed away. There's been weird dragging noises across the floor at night. It seems to move in different parts of the ceiling above us. Items have been thrown from the top of our fridge or from our pantry where we store our goods, but nothing violent. One of the funniest things is that when we're not home and our dog is left alone, my parents, who live below us, say that they can hear the dog running back and forth, his toys being thrown back and forth as he chases them. A few years back, I spent some time traveling and was living in Istanbul with a couple of roommates in a 2-story apartment. I slept in a basement room, which I shared with another girl, and our guy roommate slept just down the hall. I've had night terrors before and know they're scientific and don't really believe in the supernatural. But one night in that apartment, I woke up at 3:01 a.m. as I saw the alarm clock and felt an evil presence in the room. There was this black shadow thing with glowing red eyes crouched next to my bed, just staring at me, and I was paralyzed. I felt a sickening sense of doom and tried desperately to reach for my phone, anything to wake up, to move, to make it go away. I'm not religious, but I started praying frantically. Finally, at 3:10, I felt it leave the room, and I could breathe again and move. I was wide awake and didn't sleep the rest of the night. I was so shaken. This sounds like a typical night terror, except for the next morning at breakfast, I was casually munching some Cheerios when my guy roommate, who lived down the hall from me, plops down and is like, "Oh man, had the worst nightmares last night. I woke up at like 3:15 a.m. and saw this ball of black with red eyes in my room, just glaring at me in fury. I was paralyzed and couldn't move. It was the worst." I told him what happened to me, and we both were really freaked out. Slept with the light on quite a few nights after that. About 14 years ago, I was driving through Texas on my way to Denver in a car I had loaded up with my possessions. At around 1 a.m., somewhere just north of Amarillo, my car started to overheat, and I pulled into the only gas station remotely close. It was also closed, but I thought I'd bide some time and limp my car somewhere down the road. Other than this gas station, there was nothing and no one as far as I could tell. No cars on the highway. It was just really dark out with the lights all turned off and really quiet. After a while, the headlights of a car appeared, and as it came by, it slowed down and pulled into the station. The driver was a young guy, blonde hair. He rolled down his window, and without looking directly at me, he asked if I needed help or even a ride. Right away, I had a really eerie feeling. Also, the solitude didn't help. I was really polite and told him I was cool. My car had a problem, but I had something figured out and I'd be fine. The kid said, "Sounds good, take it easy," and drove off while still not making eye contact. My car was still really hot, so I continued to wait it out. After a while, the guy came back and asked me again. I gave him a little more detail about my plan because I didn't want him thinking I was trying to mess with the station. Just buying time and I'd be on my way. Again, no eye contact, and he pulled away. After about another 20 minutes or so, just as I was gonna get ready to move on, the kid drives back in. This time he asked me again if I needed help, but after I said thanks but no thanks, I noticed he was really getting agitated. Also, at this point the kid turned towards me. I could see this guy had no iris or pupils. His eyes were both solid white. Also, I had this sense of dread and fear that I can't say I've ever felt in my life. At the same time, he turned to me too. He was in the middle of telling me I deserved this for driving a Japanese car and that I was some kind of asshole for not letting him help me. At this point, I got in my car and noped out of there. He followed me for a bit out of the station, but turned around after about a mile.